Expected and disappointing is how the News 24 reporter describes the budget speech from Finance Minister Enoch Gondongwana on the 12th of March 2025. It was not greeted very well and was roundly criticized by virtually everyone except the former ruling ANC, now the plurality party in Parliament. Let's take a look at some of the comments that came out today, and I'll analyze these comments from the different actors involved in them. First off, presidency spokesperson Vincent Magwenya said, "We're reasonably comfortable that any remaining issues can be resolved to ensure that the budget is passed. A careful balance has been struck, and all the necessary compromises have been made on issues related to the budget. It's a budget that certainly prioritizes support and cushioning for poor households. The DA must support the revised version of the budget as it aligns with some of their proposals. Issues that are not related to the budget can be resolved in the normal course of engagements within the government and national unity." Now, what that's referring to, folks, is they're saying that the DA is obviously pushing for things that are outside the scope of the budget, probably to do with leadership or previously passed legislation like maybe Bella or expropriation without compensation. And he's saying that that shouldn't be a sticking point. Well, if the DA is ever going to push back, now's the time to push back. So we'll see what happens after that. So moving on from that, let's take a look at the actual budget proposal. Won't go into the whole thing. It'll take us a while. This is a very long speech from Gondwana. The key thing here being public infrastructure spending over the next 3 years will be over 1 trillion rand. Now, the crowd in the parliament actually applauded this. 402 billion will be spent for transport and logistics, 219 billion for energy, and 156 billion for water and sanitation. Now, here's the sticking point, and this is one of the reasons why South Africa has some serious problems. Social grants, or welfare, accounts for 284.7 billion rand in the fiscal year 2025-2026, which begins on 1 April. And how is that money doled out? Well, the old age and disability grants have been increased by 130 rand, which means each recipient will get 2,315 rand in the next fiscal year. The child support grant, which is basically kindergeld, encouraging people to pop out babies instead of being responsible, that goes up by 30 rand. If you pay taxes, you're raising someone else's children. That hardly seems fair, especially in a country that has no problem with population increase. It's not declining like Japan or Germany. The foster care grant is being increased by 70 rand. And the COVID-19 Social Relief of Distress, or SRD grant, has been extended for yet another year at a cost of 35 billion rand. That's just sheer insanity. This should have ended long ago, folks. Now, here's a few other key points, salient issues from this budget speech. Salaries constitute 76% of provincial education budgets. That means just there's 24% of the budget left over for school books, for construction, for security, for abolition units, for meals, for actual education. Teachers eat up over 3/4 of the budget. That's absolute insanity. They've added 19 billion rand over the short term to keep 11,000 teachers in classrooms. But we've already seen classroom teachers retrenched in the Western Cape and 19,000 were at risk in KZN. So which teachers are being saved? Now here's this frightening prospect for South Africa. Debt servicing now costs the country nearly 390 billion rand this fiscal year. 22 cents of every rand in revenue that the government takes in pays off debt. So you only get 78% of the budget to begin with. Now, here's the really frightening part about that. That 22 cents of every rand represents more than what the country spends on health, the police, and basic education. It's pretty scary, folks. This is what happens when you have a fiscally irresponsible government like Washington or Pretoria running up debt year after year. Eventually, the debt servicing buries you. Now, Minister Gondongwana had the following to say about his budget. He said, "We thoroughly examined alternatives to raising the VAT, the value-added tax. We weighed up the possibility of trade-offs involved, including increases to corporate and personal income taxes. Increasing corporate or personal income tax rates would generate less revenue." He's correct about that, by the way, "while potentially harming investment, job creation, and economic growth, not to mention frightening away foreign direct investment. South Africa's corporate income tax collections are already higher than most of their peer countries. South Africa's top personal income tax rate is already high, and the state can't take on more debt." Now, Enoch Gondongwana finds himself in an untenable position. This is exactly his problem. What is he supposed to do? Honestly, what is the man supposed to do? He tells the truth and they just pillar him. They just don't want to hear the truth. But the reality is that Enoch Gondongwana is spot on with this. It's not a good position to be in because he's simply telling the truth and members of parliament don't want to hear it. So COSATU, the Constellation of Southern African Trade Unions, or Congress of Southern African Trade Unions, said the following: "Whilst there are many progressive provisions that COSATU campaigned for in the budget, its primary source for funding these is an unnecessary 0.5% VAT hike for each of the next 2 years. The Federation says that not adjusting personal income tax brackets for 2025 is a painful blow to millions of highly indebted working class families and an already battered economy. COSATU cannot support tax hikes upon the working class and the poor. And that's exactly where this is going. They're hiking these social grants modestly, and then they're taking it back in the form of increased value-added tax. And we all know that value-added tax never goes down once it's increased. And who pays the burden for that? Consumers, which is the poor mostly, and middle class. The Democratic Alliance response from its leader, John Steenhuisen: we obviously put on the table several of our requirements to stimulate growth and jobs and to move beyond just tax and spend, and those have not been acceded to. We obviously remain open for further discussions before these budget instruments are voted on in Parliament in the coming months, but as the budget sits today, Wednesday, March 12th, 2025, we are not able to support it in its current form, which is a disaster for the ANC because they don't have the votes to make this thing go. They need the DA. The African Transformation Movement leader Vuyo Zungula had the following to say: the government displayed fears of raising money from big corporate interests. The amount that was raised from that, as opposed to that from mining royalties in the previous years, was 16 times higher. Yeah, well, they just want to soak corporations and those actually paying taxes. The answer here is not more taxation, it's less spending, efficient spending, and fewer ANC cadres stealing, and then things will sort themselves out. The Freedom Front Plus, part of the Government of National Unity, formerly led by Peter Groenewald, the corrections minister, now led by Corné Mulder, says it is short-sighted to think that increasing state revenue through a tax hike will adequately address the budget deficit. It added that the proposed 1% hike over 2 years would have less of a negative impact than last month's proposed 2%. A VAT increase in any form is, however, detrimental and will hamper economic growth. Hundreds of billions of rand are lost due to the costs related to black economic empowerment, which compels government to pay more than market value for goods and services. Government and the people are exploited through the policy of BE. Billions could be saved if the premium paid for BE was done away with. So while the Democratic Alliance is focused on what they want, the Freedom Front Plus is focused on what the country needs. Big distinction there between party and country. For its part, Action SA, through its MP Alan Beasley, said the following: Action SA unequivocally rejects the proposed 1% increase in VAT, 0.5 percentage points this year and 0.5 next year, as well as the hidden tax increase caused by the failure to adjust the personal income tax brackets for inflation. These measures will quietly extract more from hardworking South Africans, while state corruption, mismanagement, and waste continue unchecked under the coalition government. Remember that Action SA is not part of the Government of National Unity. For its part, the economic freedom fighters' diminishing leader, Julius Malema, said that when he was speaking outside Parliament, the budget was proof that the ANC was playing tricks. He said they said 2%, but the real intention was to increase VAT by 0.5% this year and 0.5% next year, which will lead to a 16% VAT. Well, that's true. Good math there, Juju. Thanks for that lesson. So these are the actions to the budget from a host of different parties in the South African government. And it's not good, ladies and gentlemen. It's not good. This budget will not pass. They're going to have to go back to the negotiating table. It's already been punted for a month. Going to be punted for another month. While we enter the next fiscal year, South Africa's fiscal year goes 1 April to 31 March. And we're approaching the new fiscal year. Can the country run without a budget? I don't know. Do they do continuing resolutions? We shall see. But for the first time in its history, the ANC is not ruling South Africa from Lutuli House. They're trying, but they're being forced to negotiate with their other 9 coalition partners. That in itself is a victory for representative government. Not a great victory, but a small victory. And sometimes that's what it takes, small victories. What say you, South Africa? I think this budget is dead on arrival based on the comments. And I didn't even mention South African Communist Party because their take is also pretty weak. Cheers.